So we're not gonna be tolerating any malicious comments, and we're gonna be removing and reporting anyone who feels the need to disrupt the growth and the peace of the space that we're trying to provide today. And that's because our goal is to hold a webinar where everyone feels safe and welcome. Next slide, please. Thank you, Monique. We also want to acknowledge that the Children's Partnership's headquarters is on the traditional land of the Chumash and Tongva Gabrielino people. Along with this acknowledgement, we strive to create a future that embraces justice, equity, and harmony, where the voices and experiences of all Native peoples are uplifted and celebrated. So with gratitude and humility, we honor the Native peoples of this area in Southern California, and we express our commitment to building a more inclusive and equitable community for all. And also, if you would like to acknowledge the land that you're on as well, please visit the link that we're sharing with you on the chat right now. And thank you for providing that again, Monique. Next slide, please. Again, everyone that just joined us, thank you for being with us today. This is our last webinar of the year, part of our Let's Talk webinar series. And before introducing our panelists, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. We would love to hear, to know your name and your city. And also, please, throughout the presentation, feel free to share your reactions. Please share your questions too, and please even feel free to share your, express yourself in an emoji. That's always welcome and encouraging for the speakers. So we welcome emojis as well. And so let me introduce the speakers for today. My name is Gabby Benitez. I'm a Senior Policy Associate at the Children's Partnership. And for those not familiar with the Children's Partnership, so everyone, can everyone hear me? I heard something. Okay, so everyone who's not familiar with the Children's Partnership, we're an organization in California that advocates for child health equity via research, policy, and community education. We do our work in partnership with organizations from across California, like the partners joining us today. So let me introduce you to the rest of our speakers. We have Hope Nakumara of Consul Legal Aid Society of San Mateo. Thank you for being with us today, Hope. We really appreciate you. We also have with us Sam Finn, Director of Newcomer Policy and Practice at Californians Together. Also joining us, we have Carlos Alarcón, Health and Public Benefits Policy Analyst at the California Immigrant Policy Center. And last but not least, we have Ebony Durham, Community Engagement and Advocacy Associate at the Children's Partnership. And next slide, please. We really hope that our agenda for today is useful for all of you. And because we're gonna be talking about public charge, we're also gonna be talking about what it means when it applies. We're gonna be talking about the medical expansion and newcomer students' rights. And at the end, we're gonna have time to provide you resources and also time for questions and reminders, including about a raffle at the end of the webinar. So with that, I pass it on to you now, Hope. Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry for the interruption. Gabby, can we just check that and make sure that the Spanish channel is working? I'm not hearing anything. Can someone...
Let me change my...
Can someone can you drop in the chat if you can hear the Spanish interpretation in the Spanish channel?
I'm not able to hear it either, but I can see that Julie is unmuted, but I can't hear any sound from her.
Okay. Let's hear, because I can't hear. I see a few no's. Let me see, mute original audio. Okay, I will try to continue to troubleshoot the situation. Perdónenos, no se está oyendo la interpretación en español. Hay unas dificultades técnicas. Vamos a tratar de resolucionar esos problemas. Edna, can you hear me? Or Julie, can you hear me?
In the meantime, puedo repetir todo en español, if that's helpful, Lisa.
Yeah, that would be really helpful.
Okay. Empezamos con el primer slide al the beginning, al principio.
Monique, can you go back a little bit? Yeah, maybe to the
La primera, the first slide.
I think even if you just want to start with agenda, Gabby, while I try
Okay.
to get.
So, muy bienvenida, bienvenidos todos a nuestro webinar. Estamos teniendo unos problemas técnicos, pero mi nombre es Gaby Benítez, soy de la organización de The Children's Partnership. Nosotros abogamos por familias inmigrantes, niños de color también. Y nuestro webinar de hoy está dedicado a las familias inmigrantes y a esos estudiantes nuevos que también son inmigrantes. So estamos muy emocionados de estar con todos ustedes el día de hoy. Nuestra agenda de hoy se va a tratar de la carga pública. Nosotros esperamos proveer una buena explicación. Porque ahora yo le escucho, Edna. Ok, disculpen todos el mundo virtual, pero nosotros vamos a tratar de explicar qué es la carga pública, cuándo aplica la carga pública, también vamos a hablar de la expansión de Medical, cómo acceder a Medical, quién puede aplicar y la importancia de tener cobertura médica. También vamos a hablar de los derechos de los estudiantes inmigrantes que acaban de llegar y al final vamos a tener, les vamos a proveer una lista de recursos para ustedes y vamos a tener también una sección de preguntas y respuestas. So, por favor, si tienen preguntas, póngalos en el chat para que nosotros podamos hacer nuestro mejor esfuerzo de contestar todas sus preguntas y al final vamos a tener les vamos a dar unos recordatorios incluyendo acerca de nuestra rifa al final del webinario y eso es todo. Vamos a tratar de arreglar esto del lenguaje lo más pronto posible. Gracias.
Gracias, Gabby. Thank you, Gabby. I think that we have figured it out now. I just want to remind if all panelists and speakers can please enter a channel, and Edna is on deck, so she should be able to jump in starting now. Take it away, Hope. Thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me? Good. So immigrants often hesitate to apply for public benefits for themselves or their children because they've heard that getting benefits will hurt their immigration options. They hear that using benefits might make them what they call a public charge. I'm here today to explain to you that you don't need to worry. Next slide. Public charge is a rule that allows immigration to deny some applications if they think the person is likely to depend primarily on public services in the future. But the public charge rule doesn't apply to all immigration applications, and public charge doesn't include all public benefits. Next slide. An easy way to think about this is to remember your ABCs. A is first, does the public charge rule even apply to you or your application? Next is B, even if it applies to you, what benefits count and what are safe to use? And the C is, if you're unsure, check. And I'll give you some tools to use where you can check. Next slide. So first, when does public charge apply? It doesn't apply to people who already have lawful permanent resident status or a green card. So if you got a green card and you're worried about renewing it or applying for citizenship, there's no public charge test in those applications. It also doesn't apply if you're applying for lots of other humanitarian visas like DACA or asylum or refugee status, VAWA, U or T visas for people who are victims of crime, special immigrant juvenile status, and any green cards that are based on those statuses. There's no public charge test in those rules. So if you're applying for those kinds of statuses, the public charge rule also doesn't come up. It mainly comes up for people who are applying for a green card through a family petition. Next slide. But you may be thinking that many undocumented people hope to apply for a green card through a family petition, and so that's a large group of people. But then if you think that public charge might apply to you, then you get to B and look at what benefits actually are considered in the public charge test. And you see that the public charge test includes lots of different factors, and the only two benefits areas that they look at are monthly cash aid benefits. That's like SSI for people with disabilities, CalWorks, which is cash aid for low-income families, CAPI, which is the cash aid program for immigrants who are either elderly or disabled, and general assistance relief. And you might notice that most undocumented people are not going to be eligible for those benefits. And then the other area of benefits is long-term institutional care that's paid for by Medi-Cal. That's for when you're in a nursing home for a very long time, not just for rehabilitation purposes, but you're permanently not able to take care of yourself. Or in some cases, a long stay at a psychiatric ward that's paid for by Medi-Cal. Family members can use any benefits, even these benefits that I just mentioned, and they don't count against the immigrant who's applying for the green card through the family status. So remember that other benefits like CalFresh or SNAP, other kinds of health benefits and regular Medi-Cal don't count. Next slide, please. Even if you do happen to use a few of these benefits because California has some generous eligibility programs, it's not going to definitely make you a public charge because they also look at other factors like your health, your income, the skills that you have, and very importantly, whether or not you can get a sponsor for your application. So even if you happen to use those benefits for a short while for yourself, it's not going to automatically mean that you're a public charge. So if you are unsure about what status you're thinking about has a public charge test, you can always go to keepyourbenefits.org or Tus Públicos Beneficios or beneficiospublicos.org. It's a website that's created. You can use it on your smartphone or on a computer. There's an orange button called Use the Guide. If you click on it and you enter an immigration status, it will tell you whether or not there's a public charge test and what kind of benefits. It will remind you which benefits count. And if you look at the website, it will also tell you which benefits don't count so that you can be sure about what you're doing and not be afraid to apply for benefits. This website is available in Spanish, English, and Chinese. And that's really all there is to it. So please don't be afraid to apply for Medi-Cal. And the next speaker, Carlos, is going to tell you about some exciting news about the Medi-Cal expansion. Here you go, Carlos.
Thank you so much, Hope. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I'm here to talk about the Medi-Cal expansion and what that means for all the people in this room, and maybe like what does Medi-Cal cover and how can you access it. So next slide, please. So first, we just want to I just want to start off by saying that starting January 1st, 2024, the Medi-Cal adult expansion will go into place. This is the last group of eligible Californians based on income to be included into Medi-Cal. This is including people ages 26 to 49. Again, that's starting January 1st, and it's important because immigration will no longer be a barrier to accessing full scope Medi-Cal. And what this means is that around 707,000 newly eligible Californians, I put an asterisk because it's estimated around 705,000, 707,000. Either way, this is the biggest expansion of Medi-Cal yet, and it is the final age group here in California. And we can see that going on to the next slide, please. Through the work that we've been doing at the California Immigrant Policy Center in co-leading the Health for All campaign, when it started back when the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare was implemented, we noticed that it very explicitly excluded undocumented communities. But through the organizing and policy work that we've done over the past almost 10 years, we can see here that we were able to get Medi-Cal expanded to kids ages 0 to 18 in 2016, young adults ages 19 to 25 in 2020, and older adults ages 55 and up in 2021. And as I said earlier, the final group, 26 to 49-year-olds in 2024. And as my colleague Hope mentioned earlier, Medi-Cal is not considered a public charge. Is not considered part of the public charge test. Yes, maybe a certain subsection of it, but the overall general benefits that most individuals would use for Medi-Cal does not go into the public charge test. And then if we go on to the next slide, we can see some of the things that is covered under Medi-Cal. For instance, dental and vision is covered, outpatient services, emergency services, prescription drugs, physical and occupational therapy, preventative and wellness services such as birth control or chronic disease management, pediatric care. All of these services are covered under Medi-Cal. And yeah, going on to the next slide.
Carlos, apologies. Can I interrupt you for a moment? Edna,
Yes.
I think you went back on mute. There we are. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Carlos.
Sorry. It's okay. And then if we go on to the next slide, here we can see what an individual has to do to qualify for or to be eligible for Medi-Cal. So essentially, people are eligible for Medi-Cal if they meet the income eligibility, and that income eligibility is different depending on different aspects, whether it be age, family size. So it can get very complicated. So an easy way to see if you qualify is by going to that link, tinyurl.com/FPL charts. It's also going to be shared with you all later on and afterwards. But that's an easy to follow chart that shows the different income eligibilities for the different groups in order to qualify for Medi-Cal. Additionally, people who are over the age of 65 automatically qualify, under the age of 21 automatically qualify. If you're living with a disability or you're pregnant, you automatically qualify for Medi-Cal. Additionally, if you're living in a skilled nursing or intermediate care home, you automatically qualify as well. So yeah, and it's also important to note if that you have already applied for Medi-Cal and already enrolled in restricted scope, or as most people know it as emergency Medi-Cal, then starting January 1st, you will automatically be transferred over to full scope Medi-Cal without the need of you doing anything. You might maybe get a letter in the mail letting you know that this expansion is happening, and starting January 1st, you're automatically going to be transferred over to full scope Medi-Cal. But that's pretty much all that you have to do. However, right now, some people might be getting envelopes on the mail for something called Medi-Cal redetermination. And what that means is basically it's an envelope just making sure that you update your information that the state has to make sure that you still qualify for Medi-Cal in terms of the income eligibility purposes. And then if we go over to the next slide, If you need any assistance in enrolling in Medi-Cal, I know that the application can be very convoluted, especially for people who speak various languages, right? Some of the language in terms of healthcare related language might not transfer over that easily. So if you need any assistance in enrolling in Medi-Cal, you can enroll in person at your local county office, which again, you'll have these links at the end of the presentation. It's going to be showed out to you later on. But the first link, it allows you to find your local county office based on the county that you live in. The second link, it's a link that will help you enroll online. So to enroll online, you could go through the Covered California application, and that's just the state's healthcare marketplace application. But once you input your information, if you qualify based on income, it will automatically transfer you over to the Medi-Cal application, and you will be able to access that on the second link. And then finally, in order to maybe get assistance filling out the application, maybe not in a county or government office, but with like a local enroller or community-based organization who specializes on enrolling folks on Medi-Cal, you can access that using the two links in the bottom, either the tiny URL with enroll assistance or the URL allinforhealth.org. And I believe that is all the information I've had with you for you so far. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Sam.
Thank you, Carlos. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Finn. I'm the Director of Newcomer Policy and Practice at Californians Together. And newcomer is just a word we're increasingly using in our schools to refer to recently arrived immigrant students. So let's go to the first slide and do a little overview of what we're going to talk about today. So this is my boy Oot from a few years ago in Oakland. Today we're going to really talk about who our group is, take a look at the state data just for some grounding, go over some federal court rulings, talk about that foundational state law, and go over a few of the basics of what this means for us as advocates, as parents, as community members for our kids who are recently arrived immigrant students or newcomers. So let's start on the first slide. So a little background. In California, newcomers as of this year, because of AB 714, has an official definition. So you might hear someone in your schools refer to newcomers, and they might mean 3 years or less in U.S. schools, not born in a U.S. state, between the ages of 3 and 21. This is the same as the federal definition of an immigrant student. One thing to keep in mind is that this is sort of a growing field of practice, and different schools and teachers and principals or people you talk to, they might mean different things when they say newcomer. Some people might think of that as kids in their first 6 months. Some people might think of it as kids in their first 5 years. So we're still coming together on consensus, but now we have that legal definition. Newcomers are a really heterogeneous group, really diverse by home language, by socioeconomic status. SIFE means students with interrupted formal education. So some have missed schooling, some have not. And of course, we have various statuses of family accompaniment and immigration status. Let's take a look at the data and just see how many newcomers we have in California. So we are an incredible state of immigrants, and there are so many newcomers in our state. So the last year that I looked closely at the data, we had 150,000 odd newcomers in the state. So that's 1 in 40 of every California students. 43% speak Spanish as a home language, and 67% are eligible for free or reduced price meals. So now we have a little bit of an understanding of our group of students that we're serving and advocating for, and that are our peers and friends and kids we care about. At the next slide, I just want to give a scope for how big that group is. So numbers sometimes lose their meaning outside of context, but if we hit those animations, all the newcomers in California, that's as many as we have in 23 California counties combined. We are a state of newcomers. There's more newcomers in California than there are kids in the entire Alaska K-12 system or the entire Montana K-12 system. So we have and welcome and support our newcomer kids. Let's go to the next slide. So one thing I want us to just center ourselves on is that we have really rich law supporting access and high quality education for our newcomer and immigrant students. First, we have the Lau decision, which essentially says school districts must take affirmative steps to ensure that English learners can meaningfully participate in educational programs and services. That means that it's not enough to just let a kid come to school and sit in a class that's all in English if they don't speak English. No, school has to try and vary their instructional materials and approaches and programs. The second really important ruling is the Plyler decision in '81, which guarantees that regardless of immigration status, all children in the United States are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. And as we'll see later, California has gone on to affirm that. But that is something that we can safely access without having to prove or show anything about our backgrounds. And finally, Castaneda gives schools and states a three-pronged test for what is effective instruction for our students who are still learning English. So schools should be teaching our English learners based on sound educational theory. Their programs need to be implemented effectively with all the proper resources, and it should prove effective in overcoming language barriers after a time. So we do have to hold our schools to these standards. Let's take a look at what we've done as a state to really affirm and build on this. So in 2018, Assembly Bill 699 went into effect, which was really a response to the violent, ugly rhetoric and actions of the Trump administration. And this law really explicitly affirms and builds on the existing case law, federal and statewide, and names our schools as really safe, inclusive, and welcoming spaces that serve and protect and educate our immigrants regardless of immigrant status. It required that all school boards adopt model policies explicitly around supporting immigrant students and their rights by July 2018. And there's a really wonderful guidance document that is linked here from Xavier Becerra, the California Attorney General, that was published in April 2018 that has a model for this school board policy. But these next three slides, I just want to walk through some of the verbatim guidance from the Know Your Rights section there, because Xavier Becerra can tell better than I can. So first, let's just affirm that in California, students have a right to a free public education. All students and all students age, or all children ages 16 to 18 must be enrolled in school. We're saying explicitly as a state that all students have the right to attend safe, secure, and peaceful schools and be free from any harassment, discrimination, bullying, anything. We are also explicitly affirming as a state that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in any program, regardless of any characteristics. And you'll notice that immigration status is amongst them. That was explicitly added, even though it wasn't necessarily necessary, just to say like everyone, really, really everyone, even though that was already in law. Let's go to the next page. So when it comes to information required for school enrollment, schools must accept a variety of documents from students' parents or guardians to demonstrate proof of child's age or residency. But you never have to provide information about citizenship or immigration status to have your child enrolled in school. Never have to provide a social security number. They ask for your birth certificate or kid's birth certificate, don't need to do that. You can provide vaccination records, which folks will want. You can provide utility records to show some residency, but you don't need to provide that personal information around citizenship or immigration status. Let's go to the next slide. Next, our California state law and guidance explicitly affirms that our information is confidential in the school system. This already exists in federal law under FERPA, but this is the Attorney General essentially promising us and explaining that our laws protect student education records and all personal information. So anything that would have to be released, you would need written consent from parents or guardians, unless it's for educational purposes or is already public. You could have a court order or subpoena, but you can't have law enforcement or ICE just going to a district and asking for something. That doesn't happen, and it can't happen under our laws. Some schools collect and provide publicly basic student directory information. And if they do, you have the right to opt out of that if you wish. Let's go to the next slide. Finally, we hope to get better as a state and as a nation with our communication. We can say that right now, if a school has at least 15% of the student body with the same home language that is not English, that sort of triggers a school needing to provide their communications and documents all in that language, all whenever they're doing that communication, and that's really helpful. Federally, the Title I of our Federal Education Act actually requires communication regardless of that threshold, but cost concerns sometimes stop that from being implemented entirely. Regardless, you should always ask to get translation so you can understand whatever you're being communicated about. Let's go to the next slide. Finally, just a word about English learner assessment. So schools will have you fill out a home language survey when your child enrolls to understand what languages are spoken at home and to give your child an assessment to see if there's any need for language support. So our assessment in California is called the LPAC. That stands for English Language Proficiency Assessment for California. And that's essentially used to determine a student's level of English proficiency. Now, just to note, a student might speak English very well and functionally, but still be identified as English learners. And that doesn't mean necessarily like they're still learning to speak English. It just means they're not necessarily at the highest level of academic language that like a native speaker might have initially. And so that's just something to note. But then that means that they can still benefit from our English language development services in schools, which can boost their academic English. Now, if your child is an identified English learner, the school is going to notify you in writing within 30 days of the school year starting. And they're going to provide you info about your child's language proficiency level, the programs and services that are available. You can opt out of programs or services for English learners if you like. That's a right, but that's not a recommendation from Californians Together. We recommend that you opt for those English language development services, which we know support our highest levels of English language development. Let's go to the next slide. And that is it for me. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I'll pass it on to Ebony.
Thank you. I'll let Lisa speak really quick before questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Sam, Carlos, and Hope. We super appreciate all of this wonderful information. It is quite a lot in 38 minutes. And so just wanting to take a little bit of a pause because of all of the technical difficulties to just give a little tiny recap for everyone on everything that was just presented. I can't give too much detail, but I did want to just also remind everyone a recording in English and with the Spanish translation of this webinar is going to be shared out via email to everyone who registered for the webinar, probably by next week. We are also going to share out the slide deck in English. We are going to work to try to get the slides translated into Spanish to share with everyone. And that will probably come via an email maybe in the new year. But kind of like the three main overarching points and kind of topics that were covered during this first part of the webinar were public charge, the expansion of Medi-Cal, and then Sam just went through some terrific long list of newcomer student rights. The key thing about public charge and just the biggest reminder that I took away from Hope's presentation was that there's a lot of information out there for where you can check, including the website that I'm about to, I just dropped in the chat. But that is a resource for families in California who are afraid to access public benefits because of fear of public charge. this is a website where you can go through, and it's available in Spanish and in English. You can go through this tool to help answer your questions and your fears around public charge. The important thing about it too is just to make very clear again that that it is not applicable to all public benefits, right? And so it is very important not to let it prevent you from accessing the benefits that families qualify for. Carlos's main takeaway for me was also the big expansion of Medi-Cal in the coming year. And so again, just a reminder, starting January 1st of this coming year, just a few short weeks, Medi-Cal, full scope Medi-Cal will be available to all residents in California who are eligible for Medi-Cal, right, through income eligibility, regardless of your documentation status here in the United States. And so it'll open up to undocumented residents of California who have the income that makes them eligible to receive Medi-Cal, which is wonderful, wonderful news. And as Carlos shared, that is opening it up to almost 700,000 additional California residents. So that is very exciting. And then Sam, I can't, there were a lot of details there. And so again, we're going to share the slides out. But Sam really was touching on, you know, this large population of recently arrived newcomer students here in California, and the slew, really the big package of rights that families need to be made aware of so that these newcomer students can access an appropriate education. So with that little recap, I really just want to pass it over to Ebony so that we can engage in some questions and answers. Carlos, Sam, and Hope are here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you for that recap, Lisa. All right, so now we will open it up to you all. So please unmute or raise your hand if you have any questions. If you're unable to unmute, please raise your hand so that we can unmute for you. You can also ask questions in the chat box as well. I did see a question in the chat box, and I'll read it out loud. And any panelists who would like to answer, you can answer. Question is, are there any rights for newcomers 18 years or older? What can we do if a school doesn't want to accept an 18-year-old? Do different school districts have different rules? It's like a three-part question.
It's a really good question. And would someone else like to answer? I wasn't sure if. Okay, I'll start, and if someone could finish with more information. Students in California now can attend school up to 21 in this category. And what I'd like to do is follow up when I have the right information to really cite for you, because we had some recently passed legislation in this regard. With regard to a school not wanting to accept an 18-year-old and different school districts having different rules, if they have a rule of not accepting an 18-year-old, that would mean they're out of compliance. And so, like, you know, they can't do that. And so you can complain to the school board, you can cite the ed code that we'll send out, you know, in the post-talk email, hopefully. And so I think that's just on us to send that out, unless someone has
No, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
passed on to someone else.
You did it! You did it!
You're here. You
Freaking
gotta.
climb Mount Everest.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Were you done? Okay, thank you so much for answering that question. All right. So earlier there was a few questions that people asked when they were registering for this webinar. So I will go back to those questions. I'll read them out loud and I'll have any panelists answer. First question is, do immigrants, those with a H-1B visa, also qualify for food stamps or CalAIM supportive services? And I think this one is attached to it. What exists in the safety net for unaccompanied minors?
Hope, might you have a response to that first part? I can drop the question in the chat too so that you can see it.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I think that H-1B visa means that they're here on a temporary worker visa. Is that right? I'm not exactly sure, but if that's the case, they can be eligible depending on their income.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, I don't know the answer to the AIM question. So I can try to look it up and send it along afterwards. And yeah, actually, I think I want to take back the H-1B visa advice too. I believe that that's not a category that's supported by the TCFAT benefit program, but I can also double check on that and send it along.
Thank you, Hope. And any questions that you drop in the chat, if we happen to not have a response for you live here, we will be sure to include the answer to any unanswered questions in our follow-up email.
That is correct. I will go on with the next question. What resources are you able to share for undocumented families that are in Spanish? And an additional question that's related, is there any materials, flyers, posters, social media in Spanish or Vietnamese directed at mental health, addressing the stigma some communities may have against seeking mental health? Well, for the first one about undocumented family resources that are in Spanish, there is resources that are from Sam that I will drop the link in right now. There you go. And then the second question about social media materials, flyers in Spanish or Vietnamese about mental health. Does anyone have any resources for that?
I think we have some great resources from our last webinar, the mental health webinar. So we can definitely make sure to reshare those in the follow-up email.
Thank you.
And then one more thing I'll drop for unaccompanied youth. The California Department of Social Services runs a program called Opportunities for Youth, and they fund a number of legal services providers around the state, including Community Justice Alliance, who produced that toolkit that was linked in the chat. I just dropped in the chat also a list of those community-based organizations that are providing those legal services for unaccompanied youth. So they might be good folks to get in touch with if there is one in your area that you're looking to connect with.
Thank you, Sam.
You.
I did see a question, Ebony, in Spanish that I can relay in the chat. I just lost it.
And I just looked up the H-1B visa, and unfortunately, they're not eligible for CalFresh benefits.
Thank you. Thank you, Hope. Okay, I see the Spanish question. Leticia C asked, this one is for you, Sam. What is reclassification for students?
Yeah, really good question. So reclassification occurs when a student passes the LPAC, that English Language Proficiency Test. That means they no longer take English language development classes, which sometimes are integrated, sometimes are separate additional support classes. So it just means they sort of both no longer attend those classes, that additional coursework, and they also are no longer having that label in the system.
Thank you. I will go on to the next question from Vanessa. What legal support can families have when schools are not honoring students' IEP?
That is a great question. There are various legal aid providers, and I can share, I will look for it and then I will share in the chat a list. Hopefully I can find one that is statewide. Vanessa, do you have a specific county where you're looking for the legal services for IEP? Okay, for San Francisco.
Yes,
San Francisco County, okay. So I will look those up and I will share with you. But there are various legal aid services that you could apply to that should be able to provide free special education attorneys that can help you assess a case and then maybe even represent you at an IEP meeting, not you or the person in need.
Yeah, thank you, because I'm a medical social worker and I work with California Children's Services and the Department of Public Health, and there's a lot of families that I work with that say that the Unified School District is not providing a nurse, that if there's a nurse, they're not checking on the child regularly and they need feeding tubes, and it's usually the people of color and undocumented families that get ignored in the medical system and in the school district. So I just want to empower them and provide resources that they can seek to hold the school district accountable and others accountable for not honoring the contract.
Absolutely. I actually just found there's a list of San Francisco education legal aid and pro bono services. And I just dropped that link in the chat. They look like some really good folks to touch base with.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sending it back to you, Ebony.
Thank you. There was one more, I believe one more in the Q&A chat. Anna asks, what kind of resources can undocumented children access for college, specifically financial aid? I can kind of answer that because there is a resource in the resource section that I will get to later. There is a resource by the Higher Education Technical Assistance Project, which is a statewide effort to offer zero-cost immigration legal services to CSU and CCC students by nonprofits. So I believe that's a great resource for college students who are immigrants. And they might have some good resources on that site for financial aid also. This resource will be shared to you all at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, and I would also like to add, so undocumented students in California can apply to receive in-state tuition and qualify for in-state financial aid as well through the AB 540 affidavit form, which is a form that they would need to fill out once they receive their acceptance letter into their university of choice. And yeah, that AB 540 affidavit if they qualify. And in order to qualify, you would need to have attended a California high school for 3 or more years, or have gone through the public education system in California for 3 or more years, or have obtained 3 or more year credit equivalents at a community college or adult school. If they qualify through those eligibility criteria, then they'll be able to access the California, the Cal Grant program, also the different university scholarships that they have as well. And yeah, the California Dream Act application is the financial aid application that undocumented students would have to fill out in California.
Thank you. That was great. All right, I think that was all the questions that I've seen in the chat. Is there any more questions? I see one more from Raina. What if I do not have a social security number? Can I still apply for financial aid?
The question is yes. The reason I know is because I'm also in DocU and I went to higher ed here in California. And when you fill out that AB 540 affidavit or the California Dream Act application, if you don't have a social security number, you can just put 00000 on the part of the application where it requests a social security number, and the universities understand what that means, and then they'll handle your application the way it's supposed to be handled.
Great information. Any last questions? Going once, going twice.
I just wanted to add, Jeanette added on the chat, what if they tell you not to do that? Put 000. I don't know who would tell you not to do that. You could do that on the California Dream Act application and the AB 540. Well, I don't think the FAQ asked for social security number, but the California Dream Act application, some people might tell you not to do that, but you still could. I did it back then and everything went well. And then also there are Dream Resource Centers at the different universities and colleges in California where you'll be able to ask them those similar questions and they'll be able to give you like one-on-one help.
Thank you. I think Ruth has a question in the chat I see. Can you please uplift the resources I have shared in the chat for those who are not looking at the chat, if applicable? Yes. Thank you. Do we have time for one more question?
Yes.
Okay. Raina, what if I don't have a Dream Act application or a DACA? Can I still apply for financial aid?
Yes, so DACA is not needed to receive financial aid in California. What is needed is that AB 540 affidavit status, which you get by filling out the AB 540 affidavit. And starting soon, that AB 540 affidavit will be included in the California Dream Act application. So Reina, the California Dream Act application isn't something that you have. It's just an application you fill out online through the California Student Aid Commission website, I believe. And I can go ahead and link it all in the chat.
Thanks so much, Carlos, for taking all of these questions. It's very informative. And the resource that Ruth shared, I just reshared. There's Immigrant Rising, also has a tool to help with the process of accessing in-state tuition. And so I just dropped that in the chat very recently.
Thank you. And I'm just gonna do a quick scroll to see if I missed any questions.
And if you have any other questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand.
Thanks,
Oh,
Lisa. I had
this-
another tool in there I wanted to share.
Awesome. Do you want to uplift those out loud, Ruth?
Yeah, so someone earlier on the call asked about how to support unaccompanied minors. And so there's a sheet in there from Kids in Need of Defense, and it has some great suggestions for how to support unaccompanied minors in schools. And so, you know, it has kind of an overview, but also some, you know, other, like a fact sheet. So that's a nice way to kind of look and see if you're supporting them in your schools. And then also the other resources that's in there is in English and in Spanish, and it's related to the AB 2121 legislation regarding some options for students that are enrolling in high school who may be newcomers, and what options they may have for credit recovery or getting credits or graduating with some alternative requirements. And so someone had asked earlier about that, so I just wanted to share that out. It's from Mount Diablo School District, but they have a nice page in Spanish, which can be helpful. So I put both the English and Spanish in there to share.
Thank you, Ruth. Thanks so much. I see another question here that says, is it true, or essentially, I think it asks if financial aid is a public charge, does it affect me? And I see Hope and Carlos jointly nodding their head no. Go ahead, Hope.
Yeah, it's not included in a public charge test.
Thank you for clarifying that. Any other questions? I see a lot of great information being added to the chat. We'll make sure to pool the resources that you've all included in the chat and include them in our follow-up email. And Carlos is dropping some links, a guide to help fill out the AB 540 in-state tuition affidavit. And there's also the California DREAM Act application for financial aid. Felipe, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Buenas tardes. Disculpe, ya veo que hay muchas preguntas que están relacionadas con el tema y otras que no. Y la mía es, yo estoy ya deshabilitado por un accidente de trabajo y necesito agarrar Workers' Comp, otra carrera para trabajar. ¿Ustedes tienen alguna información de eso? Como qué tipo de carreras o dónde las puedo buscar? Tengo $6,000 que la aseguranza paga. Si estudio eso, si no, pues no los puedo agarrar.
That's a great question, Felipe. I would be more than happy to talk to you about some resources and opportunities. Would you mind putting your contact information in the chat? Maybe your email so that I can follow up with you?
Sí, ya se lo estoy escribiendo, por eso pedía la información de contacto de Carlos, porque como tiene un nombre latino, pues me imagino que habla español y sería más fácil poder identificarme con él, pero no sé si sea posible, pero yo le pongo mi información en el chat nuevamente. La puse al inicio, pero se la vuelvo a poner otra vez. Gracias.
Thank you so much. I will share it with Carlos as well. I see it here. Thank you, Felipe.
A ustedes, que tengan muy buenas noches y unas felices fiestas.
All right, we've had a lot of great information shared here during the Q&A. Want to just do a last call for any questions that you have for our panelists? Again, you can unmute, you can raise your hand, or you can write it in the chat. All right. Ebony, should we do the next slide?
Yes, we can. All right, resources. So hi, everyone. Again, thank you for being here. My name is Ebony Durham, and I'm the Community Engagement and Advocacy Associate here at the Children's Partnership. We've collected some resources that we think will be useful to families, child advocates, parent leaders, and more. And if you're interested in any of these resources, they will be available to you next week when we send out the follow-up email. Next slide, please. All right, so here are some of the resources that we collected. They're separated under some categories. So we have school and education, housing, legal and social service aid, Medi-Cal, and family parent resources. And I'll just go through a few of them. Under school and education, there's a resource from the California Attorney General, K-12 Immigration Guidance. And there's also an English Learner Family Toolkit available. Supporting resilience in schools. This webpage, it provides information and resources to educators, parents, and community workers that works with students who have experienced trauma. And it includes a toolkit, training for educators, strategies for self-care, and many other resources. And then you have a Migrant Education Family Biliteracy Program, and this is a school-based family biliteracy education program that families may replicate at home to provide high-quality instruction for children ages 3 to 5. Under housing, we have some resources for homeless children and youth, and we have a resource from Mercy Housing, who works with refugees and immigrants to ease their transition into the U.S. Under legal and social service aid, there is a public charge list. And this list is a list of organizations that are able to provide assistance regarding public charge. Under Medi-Cal, we have the Medi-Cal eligibility chart. Given that your financial status can help whether you qualify for various Cover California or Medi-Cal programs, it depends on your income. So this chart will help you decide that. And then you have Medi-Cal Medi-Cal enrollment assistance as well. And here's some other family and parent resources. There's some module series. There's a family preparedness plan. There's a federal English learner family toolkit and more resource pages for immigrant families. Next slide, please. Public charge. So this is a public charge flyer that can be found on this website, allinforhealth.org, and we can drop that link in here for you. So from this map, you can find out whether you may be subject to a public charge test. So every family is different, and while public charge tests may make you nervous, use this roadmap to help you and your family get informed. Next slide, please. Reminders. Next slide. Medi-Cal renewals are happening. So if you and your family member has Medi-Cal coverage, you will need to renew at a designated point between April 2003 and May 2004. And here are 3 easy steps for you to do so. So 1 is updating your contact information. 2, checking your mail. 3 is complete a renewal form that will come in a yellow envelope in your mail. And if you need any help at all, you can get help at allinforhealth.org. And this flyer is also available on that website. Next slide, please. There's the website. All right, next, Californians Together has a newcomer education webinar series that is happening now. The next webinar series is on January 11th from 3:30 to 4:30, and it's on newcomer organizations to learn from. The next one after that is March 7th, same time, 3:30 to 4:30, and that's on writing and research on newcomer education. And to register for those two webinar series, the link is right here in the chat box. Next slide, please. And finally, a fun part, we are at the evaluation. So we will love you guys' feedback on today's webinar to see how we did. So please fill out this. Thank you. It's okay. So please fill out this quick survey. We can drop the link in the chat here. By filling out this survey, you are entering a chance to win $50. And 3 winners will be randomly selected for the $50. We appreciate your feedback. And here is the evaluation form right here.
Thank you, Ebony. I just dropped the link. Ebony will select 3 random winners and will contact the winners after the webinar, probably tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, to gather your contact information so that we can send over your award.
Yes, so you'll be personally contacted by me by phone. Next slide, please. And now we are coming to the end of the webinar. Thank you all so much for joining. And here is all of our contact information right here. Please take a screenshot. And yes, this deck and recording will be sent out to you all next week via email. So you'll have all of this information. Thank you, thank you. I see a lot of thank yous. Thank you all so much for joining, and we will see you next time.
No, están submitted.